Hi there, I am Amira, the quilter behind thelittlemushroomcap.com. I found quilting when I was studying in Australia back in 2011, and that all started when I walked into the quilt shop. So I fell in love with all the quilting fabrics that is available to us right now, and it's just amazing seeing all different types of fabrics and all the patterns of the fabrics. I just love fabrics. I can be a little bit of a fabric holic. So of course, with quilting, when you deal with fabrics, there are like larger size, the one that you bought from the shop, and then after you use it, they become smaller and smaller, and I love them all. I love even the tiny 1 inches. I do appreciate fabrics, and that is why I love scraps. Fabrics can be quite expensive, and I think like using the fabrics up to the very end is really a win-win situation for me. I can use it in larger quilts, and then after that they become scraps, and then from scraps I can turn them into different things. So it's still useful until the very end, even though it's very tiny. In my sewing room, I do make a lot of quilts, and with quilts you tend to get scraps, and a lot of it. While I love free motion quilting all of my quilts, it does take a long time to get the quilt finished. So what happens in between is usually that I pick up some smaller projects to just feel accomplished by finishing them off, and this usually involves my scraps. So I usually pick up some of my scraps, sew it together into a small block unit that is going to be a future quilt, scrappy quilt, or I usually just pick it up and just sew pieces together to make a small pouches or hot pads, and this really makes a great gift. So I usually like to have some stock of it so that I can just give them away. Since I love picking up these scraps in between larger projects, I really want to keep it simple, and I want to just be able to kind of pick up my scraps and get it to my sewing machine and get ready to sew. So I really like my scraps to be prepared for me to get to them. So let's dive into how I manage my scraps. After finishing a quilt top, usually I trim off the leftovers and square them up. This keeps my fabric flat and ready to use without needing the iron again. This is really important because I don't think I want to pick up a scraps that is all scrunched up and then I would have to iron them flat to be able to use them, because I usually like to just pick up the scraps and get ready to sew. So keeping this habit happening is really important, because after you finish a quilt, you really do need to keep all the scraps in one place, and you want it to be organized from the beginning. So I like to separate them into piles, the small itty bitty pieces, strips, these tiny slices of strings, and usually I keep them in a larger plastic bag. And when it's enough, I usually put it into a pillow and insert as a pillow. And then these leftover larger pieces, I usually use as a lining for my pouches, or later on I will cut them into specific size. So once I'm done with the quilt, I usually put all the scraps into one tray in case I want to use them in an upcoming scrap projects, because they still matches my quilt. So I think it'll be great for me to work on them while they're still coordinated. Some of the ideas that I like to do is making pillows to match my quilt, and they coordinate very well since they are still the same scraps. Now, once I'm over with the fabric collection or that fabric set, I would then collect all of these larger pieces and put them into this box. So this box here is where I keep all my larger scraps, and whenever I need to use them, I can just pick them from the box. But this is how I like to keep this box. This box remains the same amount, like this same amount of fabrics in this box. I can't have it overflowing because then I get too overwhelmed to get sorted with my fabric scraps. So what I try to do is periodically I would come to this box and then pick it up to my cutting table and use my quilt to actually cut them into usable sizes. So this is normally sizes that I usually pick up for small projects, and this can be 2.5 inch, 4 inch, some strips and bits, and it really depends on how you use your scraps. Just don't cut them into all different sizes. I would say just pick a few and work with those.
Sorting scrap is fun and easy with quilt. As you can see, I am starting with a box full of scraps. I just kept rolling under the quilt and cut into the size that I like to use. This one is a 2.5 inch squares, and I just kept rolling the smaller scraps into 2.5 inch squares. And then I have the larger piece of scraps that I turned into 4.5 inch square. These were the dies that came with my quilt Go set. But you can always add in different set of dies, and there are a lot of selection that you can choose from. And I just kept going until I finished the whole scrap box, little by little, until into all this different set of sizes that are ready to use. And most importantly, I end up with an empty scrap box.
By doing so, I actually keep this scrap bin from overflowing and spread out across different types of scraps that I have. Now, while for the larger piece I keep in the box, the smaller strips and also the itty bitties actually goes into a drawer, and I have this drawer trolley that I keep all my cut sizes, scraps, and also all these itty bitties. Now this one I also have to limit myself. Once it starts to get full, I do feel like I need to get to moving some of this to make use of them by doing quick projects. So these cut pieces stored in my drawer trolley, I can easily move them between my cutting table to my sewing machine, which makes it really easy for me to kind of like take the trolley, pull it against my sewing machine, and then start sewing some scraps. Now I do have this project that I have going on, which is a quilt that I made with my half square triangles, and I love cutting fabrics that I have into these half square triangle pieces using my Quilt Go, because it just makes the perfect half square triangles without having to trim off data. And this is my current project, which is on the Ocean Wave scrappy quilt. It is still in progress. I do take time to kind of make each block after a certain period of time. I don't work on it solely or monogamously. Basically, I am working with this project, the scrappy project, in between other projects. It just happens to be that I love working that way. How about those tiny bits and pieces? This is actually my favorite piece of scraps. They are tiny, and probably I wouldn't want to cut them into any other sizes because it's just going to be difficult for me to kind of measure them, and it's going to be too fiddly for me to work with them. So these are actually very useful for paper piecing. So I do like to use them and utilize these small scraps to do paper piecing. It actually removes the need to do precise measurements, and you don't need to cut these pieces into a certain size. It's a very efficient way to make the most of these smaller bits. As for the wider strips, these are 2.5 inch strips. I save it for making quilts. So this is one of my favorite quilts, which is Trip Around the World quilt, and I have made several of this. I absolutely love it because it just scrappy yet does have that some sort of organized pattern to it. This is just one of my favorite, and it does come together quickly because you do strip piecing. Since I love working on small projects, I've actually compiled some of my favorites in this ebook, and it's called Soulful Treasures because you can make all the useful treasures from scraps. And guess what? I have a special gift for you. You can get the book for free using the code SCRAPPYSUCCESS23. It is compiled with some of my favorite projects that I like to make using my scraps. I do stick to a certain type of projects because it just eliminates that thought process when working with scraps. I just want to go through my scraps really quickly, so that is how my system works. Keep it simple so that it actually works for you to keep you from getting overwhelmed with your scraps, and then you have a habit, a set of habits that works towards working with your scraps. And I think you'll be a great success when you have that sort of habits. It might be different for you, but this is how I've been working with scraps, and it has been a game changer for me. It's always a joy to see my scraps come to life in smaller projects, especially the pouches. They make wonderful, useful gifts for family and friends, and whenever I see them or I come to their house and I see these pouches around their home, it makes me smile because they are actually using these gifts that I make for them, and they're from scraps. Well, that is a glimpse of life of scraps in my sewing room. So I hope you've found some inspiration, some ideas to work with scraps, some of the new habits that you might want to implement in organizing your scraps and also managing your scraps from getting overwhelmed. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to get the free ebook Soulful Treasures from the link below. Use the code SCRAPSUCCESS23 to get it for free, and I do hope you make some of them. And if you pick any of them, or if you found some of the tips in this video really useful for you, make sure you tag me on Instagram, Amira_LittleMushroomCap, or email me with a picture of your projects at Amira@thelittlemushroomcap.com. So with that, I am signing off. Thank you for watching, and have a lovely quilting day and enjoy the summit. See you!